Hi, Mark Robertson here. I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, simply called Mark Robertson Talks. We meet regularly and talk about a wide range of issues. Today, I'd largely like to talk about the economy and many fallacies in the economy and many things you hear that are actually wrong or upside down or crazy. And you got a lot of crazy economists out there from all these big Ivy League schools that think they know everything and they're usually wrong about everything. And What's the story you hear about the Great Depression? Well, you hear that in the 1920s, you had these Republicans in office and they brought around about this laissez faire economics and tax cuts, and they had the roaring 20s, but it all came crashing down because of those laissez faire economics. And Franklin Roosevelt had to come along and rescue us with his New Deal, and he made things much better and rescued us from those awful Republicans. It couldn't be further from the truth. First of all, there were two economic crashes. Everybody hears about the crash of 1929 and Herbert Hoover in office, but very few know about the crash of 1921, which is very similar. Matter of fact, there's a book about that, The Forgotten Depression. It's by James Grant. It talks about the 1921 stock market crash. Well, what's the difference? Why did we have the roaring 20s after the 21 crash and the Great Depression after the 29 crash? Well, it's very simple. Economic policies. Actually, there were three Republicans, but Presidents Harding and Coolidge's policies were the opposite of Herbert Hoover's. What happened after the 1921 crash? President Harding was in office, President Warren Harding. He cut taxes and cut spending and basically let the economy recover on its own, which it did. And unfortunately, President Harding passed away of a sudden attack in office just over a couple of years. And Calvin Coolidge, who I believe is one of the greatest U.S. presidents, and Warren Harding is very underrated. Calvin Coolidge came to office, cut taxes at least four more times, cut spending, was a very strong believer in the Constitution, and was a great president, and continued the roaring 20s, simply one of the greatest economic times in U.S. history. But in 1929, there was another correction. And what was the difference? Harding and Coolidge cut taxes. They cut taxes from the range was in the 70% range to 24%. Well, Herbert Hoover came along and raised that top rate from about 24 to about 65, and FDR would later raise it to about 79 and even 90% in some cases. But anyway, Herbert Hoover did just the opposite of what Coolidge and Harding did. You know, he was a great engineer, great minds. So he brought together the great minds in the country, great businesses. Well, they had a committee and they came together and they decided, well, let's raise taxes. That's crazy. And then they brought about the Smoot-Hawley tariff. That's crazy. That shuts down economic activity throughout the world. Crazy. Tariffs never work to bring on a strong economy. Yes, you have to have fair trade, but this had nothing to do with that. And then he put on wage and price controls. They've never worked at any time. That was insanity. And it basically brought the temporary market adjustment into a Great Depression. And Herbert Hoover lost, and then FDR came along and made things much worse with his totally disastrous New Deal. Great increases in spending. Like he said, he increased taxes. At one point, the top rate for some was 90%. He even at one point wanted to raise the top rate to 99%, which is insanity. Thankfully, he was thwarted by Congress. But he was a disastrous president on the economy. There are a number of books written on that. New Deal, Raw Deal by Burton Folsom. FDR's Folly, as well by Jim Powell, are two good books. The the Roosevelt Myth by John Flynn is good as well, covering the entire Roosevelt presidency and the myth surrounding him. But the Roosevelt policies were a disaster. They were oppressive. They were totalitarian. I mean, you could get punished for raising crops illegally. They actually did that. And those books I mentioned talk about that. They just had no idea that what the free market was, or they were trying to just control the populace like all good totalitarians do. And Roosevelt was either ignorant or a totalitarian or both. It was a disaster. One of maybe our worst president in U.S. history, and dragged out the Depression for a decade. His policies did. He even tried to stack the Supreme Court when even they told him his National Recovery Act, parts of it were unconstitutional. Well, he went about and he eventually got a change there as well. He brought about Social Security, which sounds good, but it's broke. going broke, and it provides a pittance. That money would be much better invested privately. And so FDR was a disaster for this country. And then he got us into World War II, lied about much of that, and gave away Eastern Europe to his buddy Uncle Joe Stalin. So one disaster after the other for Franklin Roosevelt, and his economic policies were a disaster as well. But you hear in the textbooks in school and on the news that FDR was this great president that saved us all from these evil Republicans back in the 1920s. Nothing could be further than the truth. Actually, like I said, the policies of Herbert Hoover and FDR were very similar. FDR has just made things worse, and he was such a disaster for this country. But you talk about tax cuts. Tax cuts have always worked. I talked about the Harding tax cuts, where the president Harding, Coolidge, Kennedy, Reagan, Bush 43, and now President Trump have all cut taxes, many of them cut regulations. But what happened? The left, the media tells us after tax cuts, that creates deficits. No, what creates deficits is government spending. The entitlement program, it's out of control in this country. After every tax cut, the economy expands. Treasury revenues actually increase. After the Reagan tax cuts, Treasury revenues doubled. They greatly increased during the Harding, Coolidge years. And another little secret is that the rich actually pay more in taxes after their taxes are cut. So you on the left out there who want to soak the rich, the way to do it is to cut their taxes. They end up paying more in taxes. For example, after the tax cuts of President Bush in 01 and 03, in 03 the millionaire households were paying $132 billion in taxes. About 4 years later, in 2007, after the tax cuts had been in effect for a while, they were paying $273 billion, more than double. So, like I say, if you want to soak the rich, cut their taxes. They'll end up paying more in taxes. The same thing happened after the Reagan tax cuts. The top 1% paid more. The bottom 50% paid less. And the bottom 50% barely paid any federal taxes at all. And even that went down after the Reagan tax cuts. And the same thing is happening with the Trump tax cuts. Nearly every demographic has seen a great increase in jobs. That was before the virus. And the economy was so strong because of those tax cuts and Trump's regulation reduction that it's been able to withstand largely the virus, and it's coming back already. And like I say, there's so much ignorance on tax cuts and the economy and what the history of economics in this country. And the left uses class envy to say, oh, the Republicans just want to cut taxes on the rich. This is not a zero-sum economy. They know that by zero-sum, I mean you got a piece of pie or a pie, and you cut a piece of it, so that means there's only a certain amount left. No, the pie can grow and increase with proper tax policy, and it does expand. The economy has expanded after every tax cut, and it went up by a third after the Reagan tax cuts, and similar numbers for the Harding, Coolidge, Kennedy, and Trump tax cuts as well. The economy grows, expands, more jobs are created, pay is increased. You know, the left keeps telling us, well, we got to increase the minimum wage to help the poor. No, the way you increase the minimum wage or the wages for the poor is to bring on a strong economy, create a shortage of employees, and employers compete for employees. And that happens every time after tax cuts. It's happened after the Trump tax cuts. Employers, there was a shortage of employees, so they'll go out and provide better pay, better benefits. That's how you do it. You don't put some artificial, crazy minimum wage increase. That's very socialistic. It never works. And it dislocates businesses. They have to shut down. There should be no minimum wage. It's worthless. It brings harm to the economy. There should be no maximum wage or no living wage. All that is socialism. It never works. And it's all failed. The answer to creating a strong economy is the free market. It's private property. It's really not that complicated. I'm no great economist. It's just common sense. It works all the time. Yes, we need a good set of laws, but we don't need to be overburdened with regulation. To get these guys elected to office, they got to figure that they got to be there for some reason to be legitimate, so they keep over-regulating, keep coming up with these regulations and spend all day doing that harm businesses. Most have never run a business. Matter of fact, there's a story about George McGovern, Senator McGovern from South Dakota. He ran for president in 1972 as a Democrat nominee. He once tried to start a hotel. He couldn't believe how many regulations this government put on him to start that hotel. he was overwhelmed. I don't believe he ever got it started. But that's the same situation with most who are in elective office. There's some businessmen there, but most are lawyers or in other forms of government, and they really have no clue about the free market or what it takes to get a business together or start some kind of entrepreneurial activity or enterprise. And they're just clueless. They get their government salary every year, live off that, and all the perks and benefits. They really don't care, or they really don't know. It's all about getting reelected for their power, so they can get all the perks of office and have a good time. And they don't really understand what is the foundation of this country, which is business. The foundation of our country is business. As Calvin Coolidge said, the business of America is business. It's big business, it's small business. Both can get along. Both have things to offer the country. Both do things that others can't do. Small businesses can provide individual service. Yes, we need, you need car companies to make cars. You can't, unless it's going to be a Rolls Royce, it's hard to make cars on an individual basis. Mass production that Henry Ford brought along is what keeps the prices low and keeps the availability of cars for the public. I mean, that's how prices come down too. Things are expensive at first, then they come down as they're mass produced. So that's just the economy. And but what today? You get so many these people in Congress today. Just recently, within the last couple of days, a lady congresswoman came to the mic and says, we need to get rid of basically capitalism in this country and the profit motive. It brings great harm. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. The profit motive is what brings our high standard of living. And actually, the profit motive brings down prices and brings down costs, whether it's at a grocery store, whether it's at Walmart, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's even in education. I mean, what does Walmart do? They make tens of billions every year, if not hundreds of billions, in money and profit. But how do they do that? They did it by getting prices lower. And so you get the mass of people going to Walmart, and their profits are high. Yes, their drive for profit, but it lowers prices. It creates a higher standard of living for the people who shop there, for the people who work there. No, nothing's perfect, but it is a good situation. And the drive for profit is actually a good thing. And I'm not even talking about the Darwin approach, the dog eat dog type of thing, survival of the fittest. This isn't even that. The free market is very compassionate. Competition is compassionate. People can learn from competition. You see somebody doing something better, you try to do it better than them, you learn from them, and you try to offer your service as well. There's room out there. There's money out there for everyone. There's no limited pie. People can make it. Now, some people fall, they get back up, they try again, and that's what the free market is. And you learn how to put your talents to use. Everybody's got God-given talents that are theirs alone. They put them to use. They get energized by it, and that's basically what our economy is. I believe it was Adam Smith, who said the division of labor. Well, division of labor is basically people just using different talents. I mean, I'm on this computer here. I basically barely know how to turn it on, but if it breaks down or something, I can take it to somebody to fix it who knows how to do it, or even somebody shows me how to set this stuff up. It's basically, they have those talents. They may not be able to sit here and jabber for 20 minutes like this. They might be able to do that too. This may not even be a talent. But anyway, what I'm saying, division of labor, division of talents is how our society goes. And you offer it, and the competition is, like I say, is what keeps prices low. The profit motive is actually what keeps prices down. But these people, they want a socialist state. It's never worked anywhere at any time. It's always been a failure. So either they're ignorant or they're tyrants, and they want to control the people, control the masses. They actually don't like people being successful. That's great harm to their electoral possibilities. If they have successful people, then they don't need government programs. Or they don't need government programs anyway, but they'll just think they do. So they don't want people to be that successful. They want to keep them under their thumb, and okay, yeah, they can have a job and make some money, but they don't want them ultra successful. They don't like the millionaires or the billionaires. Now, there are a lot of leftist billionaires that are very good at their niche, but are largely clueless about a lot of other things. So they say some crazy things too. But basically, the free market is the most compassionate system of all. It's basically like natural law. It's a natural system. The free market is biblical. I mean, it's what it is. It's most beneficial to the most amount of people, and it's actually the free market is actually like a meeting. I mean, you meet people. It's about camaraderie, and you meet friends. You buy your car from the same guy, and they call up and how you doing? How's everything working? Everything okay? And it's that's part of the free market. It's not. Yes, it's tough. It's competition, and it can even be cutthroat. But the free market is more of a form of cooperation. And I don't want to sound like rose-colored glasses. It's tough out there. It's a challenge. Sales and things like that. It's not easy. But the free market is the best answer. It's about people. It's about serving people. It's about providing something of value to people and serving them, and they're glad to pay for that value. And it's a form of cooperation that you can do this for me, I can do that for you. It's bartering, and you actually have money involved in the situation. But the free market with low taxes, low regulation, that's the best system of all. Sadly, right now, the country of Hong Kong has been taken over by China. Hong Kong was one of the freest places on earth, extremely low taxes, very little regulation, and they were booming. Now, there are not a lot of natural resources there, but you see the skyline, it's just multitudes of skyscrapers. The country was roaring, and now back in '97, China took it over from Great Britain, and you knew this would happen. China eventually comes in and clamps down and puts their communist thug boot on Hong Kong, and it's basically shutting down a good thing. But hopefully somehow that can get turned around. It doesn't look promising, though. The tyrants are always want to control, and it never works. The free market is what works. It is absolute tragedy what is happening to Hong Kong. And they have those evil forces that want to take over the world like that. They've always been with us, so they have to be fought off for freedom and the free market, which is the best answer for the economy. And it's the only answer. Nothing else works. Socialism brings great harm. It always does, whether it's in healthcare, even school. Look at our school system. It's basically socialism, and it's a disaster. Look at the VA. It's a disaster. It's socialism. The free market works. Private charity works. That's another thing. After tax cuts, charitable givings increase. People have more money. They want to get involved in helping people. People have a natural desire to help actual people in need. But these government programs actually bring harm, and they actually hurt private initiatives to help the poor, because it's taken for granted that they will be helped. But it doesn't. It makes things worse. It hurts the economy. As Ronald Reagan said, the best anti-poverty program is a job. It helps people, and the strong economy raises wages. A rising tide lifts all boats, as the saying goes. Now, every time I do these little get-togethers, I usually like to recommend some reading. I'm not an expert. I have some generalized information and knowledge. I still have a lot to learn, but I read the books of some people who are very expert in the field. And on tax cuts, we hear they don't work. Supply-side economics, trickle-down economics never works. Well, it always works, as we talked about. And there's a very good book called Iconoclasts. It's by Brian Dimitrovic, and it's the subtitle, The Rebels Who Sparked the Supply-Side Revolution and Restored American Prosperity. It's very good. It tells the truth about tax cuts, regulation reduction, and how they've actually worked and how they've brought on a strong economy. And then we talked about the Kennedy tax cuts. Brian Dimitrovic and then Larry Kudlow get together this book, JFK and the Reagan Revolution. Talks about the great success of JFK's tax cuts and the Reagan Revolution and the boom brought about after both tax cuts. And it's a wonderful book, gives you details and facts and what went into both and how they were very successful, and that they always worked. Supply-side economics. It's just a fancy term. It's basically just common sense economics. And there's also a book called The 7 Fat Years. Basically, that's what he talks about, the Reagan tax cuts and what they brought on 7 fat years. Well, they actually brought on 25 fat years before the economic downturn of 2008. But Robert Bartley, the late Robert Bartley, formerly the Wall Street Journal, and he wrote this book about the Reagan tax cuts. But also, 7 fat years is a biblical term and talks about being biblical, and it's a very good book as well. Highly recommended to learn about it. And then finally, a book you can read anything by Art Laffer and Steve Moore. This is one of theirs is Return to Prosperity, but read anything by them, you'll learn about the tax cuts and how they work and what brings on a strong economy and what's best for everyone. And one other thing, the last session we talked about poverty and the poor, and I was going to mention another book there. Actually, I've mentioned a couple of books now, but I forgot to mention it by the great Amity Schley. She's a very good writer. She has a book just simply called The Great Society, or actually called Great Society. Very recent book, just came out, and it's outstanding. Talks about all the disasters brought about by the Great Society and the war on poverty and things related to it, and all the disaster and harm that is brought about. And highly recommend that as well. And we're talking about the Great Depression. Amity Slade also wrote a book, highly recommended, called The Forgotten Man. It's also a good book on the Depression and what it brought about and the harmful policies of FDR. FDR and LBJ were two disasters, and they brought great harm to the country. And those books explain that very well. Highly recommended. And we are glad you could be with us today, and hope you enjoyed it. And we'll talk to you next time. And you all have a great day. Thank you.